Good evening, everybody, and thank you again for the invitation. So I'm going to speak to you about active commutes practical advice on how to become more active and sustainable. I'm coming from the Irish Heart Foundation perspective primarily, and as many of you will be aware, 80% of premature heart disease and stroke is preventable through healthy lifestyles, including having a physically active lifestyle. But of course, there are profound benefits in terms of other conditions as well. So an active lifestyle also confers huge benefits in terms of mental health, dementia prevention, cancer prevention, diabetes prevention, etc. So I'm certainly not just coming from a cardiovascular point of view. I'm going to touch on kind of three main points. One is in terms of framing the conversation. So before I get into kind of where are we at as a nation in terms of physical activity, I'm just going to talk about kind of how we talk about physical activity. And then moving into kind of the state of play, where are we at the moment, what are the guidelines, what should we be doing, and then some kind of practical tips to finish up with. So in terms of framing the conversation, I want to make 3 points here. Active travel is not just about commuting. We often talk about commuting, but active travel is much broader. It's how we live our lives as citizens. It's how we engage with our environment, how we travel for leisure, for learning, for education, etc. as well. So it's not just about how we get to and from work. This is about how we move about in a more general sense. And in a practical way, what I'm talking about here is things like greenways are often promoted as being really important for tourists, and that's really true. But what about the citizens who live there all of the time, the local community? The infrastructure should also be framed in terms of how the local population moves about their community. Where you live directly affects how active you are. So the environment, in terms of the built environment, is a really important factor influencing your physical activity levels. It has a huge influence. So being aware of the importance of physical activity is great, but we know from behaviour change point of view, the environment that we live in plays a really huge role in determining our behaviour. Finally, in terms of framing, physical inactivity is often framed as a lifestyle factor. Is this correct? When we talk about lifestyle factors, that infers that we're talking about, effectively blaming individuals if they're not active enough. So it's down to an individual's lifestyle. Are they active? Are they not? When in fact, as I've just mentioned, the environment that we live in has a huge influence as to whether somebody is in fact active. And it's important that we consider that when we're talking about lifestyle factors. So the current state of play, where are we at? So the recommendations from the World Health Organization that are reflected in our own national policy, you'll see here vary depending on population group. The important take-home message here, move more. Don't worry too much about the numbers. The more you move, the more frequently you move, the more you vary that movement, the better for your health. So more is better. So yes, there are specific recommendations for adults, a minimum of 5 days a week, a minimum of 30 minutes a day. And that can be built in by smaller blocks. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes all in one go. Children need at least 60 minutes not all in one go. Children need at least 60 minutes per day. And again, there are other recommendations in terms of building in strength building exercises as well. So not just aerobic activity, but also importantly 2 or 3 days a week building in muscle strengthening as well. And that's particularly important as we go into older age. In terms of those with disabilities, it's really about moving as much as possible within your own personal circumstances. So where are we at in Ireland? This data is from the Healthy Ireland survey from 2019, and you can see we're not in a great place. Less than half of us in Ireland are meeting the physical activity guidelines in terms of that minimum 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And you can see a very stark reduction. The older we get, the less active we are. And that's true of men and women. However, good news, almost two-thirds want to be more active. There's a willingness, there's a recognition that people aren't as active as they wish to be. And this was particularly the case in women. So there's an opportunity here. People want to be more active. How can we help them to meet their goals? And we also know from this Healthy Ireland data that those who live in more affluent areas are more likely to be meeting those minimum requirements in terms of physical activity guidelines. So again, the environment is shaping how active people are. Looking at the recent census data, this is just some selected figures, and we can see that disappointingly, there's an increase in driving versus green modes of about 114,000 people, which equates to around the population of Waterford. So we're not going in the right direction. Thinking about children getting to and from school, the dominant form of transport here remains the car, both at primary and post-primary level. And even though obviously post-primary children have more more independence, nevertheless, we don't see much of a difference between primary and post-primary. Again, some good news, 88% more primary children are commuting by bike than the 2016 census data, and the numbers of young people in secondary cycling to school has increased as well. So there are encouraging figures there, but they're starting from a really low base. So, there's an awful lot more that needs to be done. We also need to consider the gender dimension. And again, this is census data, and you can see the gender comparison in terms of those cycling to work, men and women, across the time trend here. So you can see that there's essentially no movement. We're not making progress in terms of supporting women to cycle to work. And research by the Transport Authority in the last couple of years has indicated that the main barrier for women to cycling is the lack of dedicated supportive infrastructure. So it's not about wearing high vis, it's not about putting paint on roads, it's about proper supportive infrastructure that will help women to feel safe in cycling. So in terms of co-benefits, there's a plethora, and you'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to go through each of these individually, but suffice to say that there is a huge overlap between policies to promote an active nation and policies to address the climate crisis. So you can see there's a plethora of benefits. So, why not? What have we got to lose by focusing on this policy agenda? And finally, some practical advice. First of all, I'd ask people to pause and reflect. Think about your mindset. What are you ready for? And this is a heart focus because it's taken from an Irish Heart Foundation resource, but obviously can be applied in a more general sense. So, where am I at right now? Before I leap into making changes, going to the gym, buying a bike, stop and think, where am I at right now? That mindset piece is important. And how confident am I to make those changes and to stick with them as well? And we might think about mapping our habits. What is the trigger for the current behaviour for me, driving to work all the time, or for me, not cycling? What is the behaviour and what is the result, and how does that make me feel? And kind of doing a little bit of prep work and laying those foundation stones can be really beneficial before we might leap to actually make some changes. From a practical point of view, you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with many of these points. So, obviously, if you haven't been active for, or if you've been unwell or not been active for a long time, obviously check in with your GP before starting any kind of dedicated activity programme. Make it enjoyable. Don't make it a slog. It's really important that this, builds into your lifestyle, that it's something that you want to do, that it's something that is going to be sustainable. Having a buddy always helps, that accountability piece. The expected messaging around warming up and cooling down. So, in terms of, preparing our body. Planning it in. So, actually blocking it out in your calendar, that lunchtime walk at work, or that, whatever it is for your schedule, actually blocking that time off and making it as important as other commitments in your life. Obviously staying hydrated, wearing comfortable clothing, taking every opportunity to move through the day. So again, move more. It's not just about exercise, it's about activity. It's about how can you build that activity into your day. So, if you're on a phone call in work, can you stand up? Do you have to be sitting down all of the time? So, it's about kind of building that movement piece in as much as a dedicated exercise. And obviously listen to your body. If it doesn't feel right, listen to your body. Check in with your GP if you're concerned. My final point is perhaps I would feel the single most important action you could take. If you want to be more active, everything I've just mentioned, absolutely. But if you want to be more active, you need to live in a world that supports you to be active. And I would recommend getting active as a citizen. We've got local elections coming up. We have a European elections. We'll have national elections in the next 12, 18 months. Talk to your elected officials. Demand a better environment to support you to be active. Thank you.